Okay, so here we are again, Asyia, for part 2 of the Handover podcast series.
A completely natural conversation, part 2.
In a natural setting on a typical Doha day. So
it's raining.
It's raining, which doesn't happen very often.
Which as a Brit person, it doesn't sit the same way as it does in Qatar, where rain is seen as a blessing, and indeed it is.
Yeah. So we're overlooking the Qatar National Library, where we recorded the first part of the podcast. Behind that, you've got the iconic Minaretin building, which is Education City Mosque. And behind that, of course, is the Doha skyline. You've got a couple of the branch campus universities here. This is the Green Spine, the ceremonial court.
It's beautiful.
Behind that is Al Shakab, which is the equestrian center. And of course, on this side, you've got the QNCC, the Qatar National Convention Center, where WISE has been taking place, the summit.
24th and 25th November, we had a small shindig.
We had a small gathering, yes. And in fact, WISE was, if I'm not mistaken, the first event to take place at QNCC when this opened in 2011. It's either the first or the second. But yeah, this is the home of the WISE summits. So, Asyia, before we pick up on our conversation, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge where we are, and specifically to say that we're overlooking Qatar Academy Doha. So it's a sort of rather modest building that's behind the white domed building. It's got a little pyramid in the middle, if you can see that. Mm-hmm. So that's the first building, the first educational institution to be set up here in Education City. And so about 30 years ago. And then this whole ecosystem essentially was built up
it's remarkable
around that.
In the past 30 years, starting from that one school, you've got you've got more schools, you've got special educational schools, universities, and a policy hub, as well as a library that we had up on the
library, the convention center, the science and technology park, the research institutes. Yeah, so there's an entire, as you say, education ecosystem that has sort of blossomed out of the desert.
And when I first came here, it was really inspiring to see how a vision of one person, like Sheikh Moza's vision, then gets executed, and it's a real manifestation of that vision.
Yeah. So picking up on where we left off, which is, to say a little bit about your journey and how it brought you here to this space, to this ecosystem.
So I'm a born and bred Londoner in Brent, which back in the day was quite a rough area of London. I knew I wanted to be a teacher from the age of 13. I don't know why. It was just very, very clear to me at the age of 13 that this is what I wanted to do. When I reflect on it later, I think it was about control and power. That when you are a teacher, you close the classroom door and you are the one in charge.
You were channeling your inner, I don't know, Napoleon or something.
And I loved it. I loved being a teacher. I really enjoyed it in some very tough schools in London. And I actually went back. I was teaching in a very good school, kind of got a bit bored, and decided that I was going to go back to the school that I was a student at, which at that point was rough. And I had it in me in the sense of, why am I so hard to teach? Because you have labels on you, single parent family, it was my father who brought us up, or high poverty, and maybe English not your first language, although I always thought it was my first language. So these labels get put on you, and they might not be intending to hold you back, but they do. And so I've always sort of resisted this idea that there's something tough about teaching us, and it's harder. And it comes from, and I think this drive for equity comes from also first-hand experience about kids like me or the students who came to my school getting written off. And that extended throughout my career. I went on to become a teacher. We raised learning outcomes substantially. It was the second highest value add in mathematics in England. And so I was invited to be a maths advisor coach in the local authority, and then invited to be part of the Department for Education in the UK, looking at raising achievement of minority ethnic children. And I've also been one of Her Majesty's inspectors in Ofsted, senior HMI. And there, what I really liked about it was the focus on outcomes. And you're trained to say, not look at the inputs, or not look at what's, not disregard it, but really put more prominence on what are the inputs and what the adults are doing, making a difference to learning outcomes. And that's always stayed with me.
And beyond just inputs, right? You're also looking at the overall environment, things like school culture, classroom culture, all of that, right? It's not just pure inputs, meaning this much money or this much teaching hours. There's all those other intangible elements.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at outcomes, you're not just looking at learning outcomes, you're looking at personal development and well-being outcomes, and you work backwards and you say, what is contributing to that? What is the culture? How are the teachers supported? How are the parents engaged? How are aspirations raised? How, and recognizing where schools go above and beyond, but also without fear or favor was the maxim. And I'm not saying at all that Ofsted is perfect, but this bit about you're also speaking on behalf of students. So when things are not as they ought to be, you call it out, and you, in a way, you do it publicly. You publish. You say the standard, the quality of education being delivered is X, Y, and Z. Here is Y, and then you need to have robust evidence to back it up.
So if you take your teaching career, coaching, Department of Education, HM inspector, how many years is that? Now, what are we looking at?
Oh, you're going to make me do my maths. I think it's probably about half my career. So it's 12 years teaching, 18, 19 years, 7 years, 6 years in inspection, 5 years in DFE. So quite a solid chunk being at the forefront. And then I kind of fell into international development by accident. Was part of professionally grew up as national strategies in England, which was a real sort of large-scale national reform program, structured pedagogy essentially about lesson plans, coaching, teacher training, etc. But done really well, although of course not perfect, and it did have an impact. And from there, I fell into international development. There was a role going for a senior advisor in Department for International Development, and I thought that looked interesting, give it a try. And I went from managing £12,000 to leading a program, co-leading a program that's £650 million in Pakistan. I learned a lot. It was definitely a sink and swim situation. And there again, the focus perhaps at that point in international development wasn't on outcomes. It was very much how many teachers have been trained, how many schools have been built, literally walls, boundary walls and things. And so pushing that to be again, what is that delivering as outcomes, particularly for the underserved?
And that's actually interesting in and of itself, because you went in obviously as someone with deep knowledge and understanding of education, and specifically K-12 education, but then to take that knowledge and apply it in an international development setting. Again, I think it's fair to say it was quite groundbreaking, because typically education has been a late arrival to the international development game. And in fact, one of the reasons why WISE was set up by Her Highness was she felt that education wasn't given its due as a tool or an instrument of international development. And so I wonder if you had that feeling when you were putting in place this program, that you were, potentially breaking some new ground here.
So I think education perhaps had a focus. What I felt was deeply lacking was the focus on pedagogy. Like, education is such a broad term. Having this clarity of what are we trying to change? What does good look like? How do we get to it?
Yeah.
The importance of the science of learning and the science of teaching. And that there's a discipline to this. I think perhaps health might have had a more rigorous scientific approach, whereas education perhaps was like, we'll build a school, we'll train teachers, etc. So I think it's really important, and it continues to be important. And I think this is where some of the work WISE is doing really resonates with me, is that there is a rigor, there is an evidence base that needs to be applied.
Yeah.
And it can't just be a case because we've all gone to school, we know what to do. And perhaps in those days in particular, I found it frustrating where we didn't take seriously the sort of going beyond education and thinking in sort of big, broad terms to actually saying, how do we know this is going to work? What evidence do we have to apply? And bringing the research lens to it, that there are things that are more likely to work than not.
Yeah, and again, I think what's interesting about your experience set is it very much speaks to, I think, what many of us who have been in the sort of policy development arena intuitively understand, which is it's what happens on the ground that ultimately determines whether or not an intervention succeeds.
Absolutely.
I know it sounds like a truism, but again, I think in the international development space, very often the focus has been on policies, right, or on infrastructure. In your case, the program that you were running was very much, okay, I want to see and I want to change what happens in the classroom, and that will then hopefully translate into the kind of outcomes that we want to see. And again, I think that's very much, I would say, the DNA of WISE. So we position ourselves as not only trying to influence policy, but trying to influence practice.
Absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. Whatever we're talking about in rooms, and often those rooms become rooms where a certain kind of person is allowed in. What we need to check for is it changing at the classroom level?
Yeah.
And that policy informing practice, that our attention is focused on that. The intervention is focused. Will teachers take it up? If they take it up, will it make a difference? Are the researchers looking at the right things? Are we evaluating the right things? And sort of and it took time to convince people. And I think the most successful example is the work that I was doing in the Gates Foundation before joining Qatar Foundation.
Okay, wait, sorry, can I interrupt you there? Because I want to sort of maintain a bit of a timeline.
Okay.
So we did DFID, right? And the program in Pakistan. Then what happened in your journey to bring you here? And I want to get to Gates because that's the sort of the.
So DFID was a no child posting. And so DFID Pakistan was a no child posting. I had 2 children at that point, and they were behind with my husband in England. And so it wasn't something that I could continue doing for a long time. I learned a lot. I hope I contributed a lot as well. And I came back to the UK, and I came back to Ofsted as a senior HMI. And there was training inspectors, but also inspecting local authorities and being a lead local authority inspection. And here, I think one of the things I want to call out was the incredible amount of data we had and how that data was used.
Yeah.
To be able to go into a local authority, have data about children's health, about their education, about where they were going on to, the continuity, the transition, the support being provided, and having quite tough conversations with local authorities about how they were using data, how they were supporting young people to go on to become productive citizens, was really eye-opening. I think you also saw there the amount of things that were on a head teacher's plate, the amount of stuff that we were expecting schools to deliver on. And it was just increasing. So it was humbling as well. And being respectful of that as an inspector, you go in for 2 days and this is a lifetime's work of an entire organization. And you're trying to capture it.
Or several lifetimes in some cases.
Absolutely. And you're trying to capture it, and more being put on schools and being held responsible for, and perhaps the budget's not responding to that. So it's humbling. And then from there, what did I do next? I joined PwC, and I was leading the Girls Education Challenge, which was a very large UK government funded program to improve outcomes for girls across the world. I think we reached about 1.4 million girls across 14 countries. We had about 34 to 40 programs we were funding, and in many diverse settings, from northern Nigeria, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, really looking at what are the barriers to girls being educated and how programs were addressing those barriers.
So PwC, they were a co-funder, so it was a public-private partnership?
No,
or they were just administering the program?
They were the sort of implementing the fund manager of this program. And it was a program that had several partners coming together as a consortium, and then us funding programs. The thing I liked about this, which I think some of the programs struggled with, was each of those funded programs had an impact evaluation. And we were looking at, again, the difference the program's interventions were making. I found there were some amazing programs that were doing incredible work, like CAMFED in I think that was working in Ethiopia and Tanzania.
I mean, they've got programs all over Africa, but Wise Prize winner Anne Cotton from 2013, 14.
So 14. I mean, I'm not surprised. Really thoughtful, head and heart approach to program, and really understanding the community. We had programs in Afghanistan that were sort of an informal school approach, so there'll be a classroom in somebody's home, real high impact. I think it was Save the Children as well as Aga Khan Foundation working there, and looking at the role of technology can play. Please go and see the website, learning happening there. But I think one of the aspects that I found perhaps more challenging was this bit about programs were doing anything, or maybe anything is too harsh, but ideas that perhaps we know do not have more likelihood of improving outcomes for children, let alone girls. At the same time, programs were really insightful in their learning about what was stopping them. And one of the myths was, it wasn't the case that parents didn't want to educate girls. What they were often making choices based on poverty. And once you sort of took away the poverty barrier, girls were going to school. And then the sort of typical thing that I go on about, if you are in school, it doesn't mean you're learning. So you have to improve the quality of teaching and learning, and raise expectations about what our girls can achieve. I think there was also learning about what happens if you focus on just one group alone. And so some of the programs really included boys and really reflected on the sort of how the interplay between the girls and the boys were.
I mean, that's one of the things that Her Highness is actually pretty firm on, that it's yes, of course, girls' education, but oftentimes it's not enough. It's got to come with, with boys' education, moving almost in tandem, so that you don't put at risk whatever gains you have with girls' education aren't jeopardized because you're failing on the other side.
Exactly, and when there are when poverty is a real issue, it impacts equally on girls, or not necessarily equally, but impacts both on girls and boys. So in Afghanistan, girls and boys were a part of the program. In other countries, there was a real reflection on having boys understand why there was a focus on girls as well. So I think, and now when we look at currently in some areas where boys outcomes are behind. So really looking at, it behoves to look at data, use that data, and have nuanced support.
Okay. So that's PwC, and then Gates?
So the reason I moved, I really enjoyed my time in PwC. I think it was one of the most inclusive organizations I worked in, and a real sort of real desire to understand how do you have a representative workforce. So really enjoyed that time. But Gates was putting a program in place that had a very, very specific focus, and that focus resonates with me. How do we improve learning outcomes? And that single-mindedness, I think perhaps in education programs where we try to do everything, isn't necessarily going to deliver as much as if you have a very specific focus. And I also like that startup mentality. So it was a very small team. It was just the program was starting. Giran Bihari, rest his soul, was an incredible visionary and a real sort of a reader and using evidence to understand what the problem was. So they landed on, we want to improve foundational literacy and numeracy. And it was, I think it was their first external hire, external senior hire, and that was working with the team there to look at what needs to be done and to devise programs. I was the global education policy lead. I led the work on India, on teaching and learning solutions, and the EdTech and AI strategy. My work in India, we had worked with amazing partners like Central Square Foundation, Language and Literacy Foundation, Madi Foundation. And one of the things I really appreciated was working with partners from the country. And there the partners got this focus on teaching and learning being important. And so the work there was interrupted by the pandemic. It was a very harsh pandemic in India, so for 2 years schools were closed. The partners used this time for planning and structured pedagogy, so new lesson plans, new teacher training, new approaches to assessment, and real credit to the government, who both the national government and the state governments, who took this agenda seriously about early grade reading and numeracy and declared a national mission, Nipun Bharat, where they had a target that by the end of grade 3, children will be reading at X words per minute, and numeracy as well. It is a real credit that in Uttar Pradesh, in a state with 8 million children in grades 1, 2, and 3, there was a 16 percentage point increase in literacy outcomes and 20% on numeracy. And the work continues. It's still, a very high proportion of children not reading at that age. But it shows that you can improve outcomes in a relatively short time, that a focus on teaching and learning is key. And then also government systems can produce this impact.
And also, of course, the dimension of technology and how that can contribute. And so you're bringing, I think it's fair to say, a wealth of experience to WISE. You've now been here for coming up to 4 months. It'll be 4 months at the beginning of the new year. You're in office. So
Yes.
congratulations.
First week in office.
First week in office as CEO. You've experienced the summit, the global summit. You've seen the prize, the reconstituted, I should say, prize, which is now focused on solution development and supporting earlier stage initiatives and startups. What are your just reflections of where WISE can build on what you're sort of inheriting, and where can you take this initiative in support of ultimately what we're all here for, which is really to make sure that the benefits of education touch the lives of as many people as possible, or ideally everyone. Right?
So many ways to answer that. I think WISE is such an incredible platform, an incredible team, only 19 people, and to see the summit being produced and the quality and the scale. Like we looked at the CNC building, QNCC, just now, how big it is, and what attracts like 200 countries coming, representatives from 200 countries coming here, first ladies, education ministers, all the way up to teachers, policy makers, funders, is the content that's been put together by the team.
Yeah.
And the content that resonates with the time that we are in now. So humanity, humanity being at the center of education and technology being in service of humanity. It's a massive production. I remember when I first saw it, I went, whoa. And the range of conversations and the diversity of the conversations is a real credit to the team in curating that. And we spoke about this at the last podcast, the location of the WISE Summit in Doha, in Qatar, pulling people from East and West and North and South, but also the intellectual capacity at the center to understand what people want to talk about, to curate the right people to this. And the feedback has been incredibly positive, both sort of like people posting on social media, but also a really high proportion responding back.
Yeah.
So it's in a way daunting to take that platform on and to think about where can it be even better. I think one of the things that certainly from feedback from people is they're not aware of the incredible work that gets done between the summits, on the research agenda, on the evaluation agenda, and the partnership agenda.
Yeah.
And so perhaps one of my focus would be to highlight that more.
Yeah.
Just examples of the research, and you'll probably be able to talk about it more than I, but the AI in higher education in Africa, how that's being used. The fact that 50 African institutions, higher education institutions, responded, 4,000 people, surveyed on that, and finding some really great examples of innovation that are happening in Africa. And then the power of that research is not stopping. The second phase is going to build on that. I think it's incredible. Some of the other research on disinformation and misinformation, on how technology is influencing that, as well as how teachers can be more, how do we also experimenting with most effective ways of training teachers.
Yeah.
On the innovation side, I'm genuinely impressed by the design of the prize, where you're working with 6 finalists for 12 months. They're building their minimum viable product. And even in that 12 months, going from zero, because they're building it, there's evidence to show it's been having making impact on outcomes. Then the summit itself, where the 3 prize winners were announced, and then continuing to work with them for another 12 months to really develop that product. I think that post-prize work is rare, and so I think it's a really good design, and I'm looking forward to how we as a team support those innovations to give them a chance of success and scaling.
Yeah. And to amplify their impact, and then if I may just also, and you touched on it in your comments, I think what might also be worth focusing on is really to highlight the extent to which, yes, WISE is this, great team of 19 people, but it's more than that, right? It's this community, right? So you spoke about the higher education research work on Africa. Well, that's powered by this thing called the Education Collaborative, which is run out of Ashesi University, which was the founder of that university, Patrick Ewa, was a WISE Prize laureate in 2017, the Legacy Prize, as we refer to it now.
But that's such a beautiful story.
Right, and he used part of the prize money to seed this network, right? So there's that continuity in that community that really amplifies the work of WISE. And I think, we've tried, right? Believe you me, we've tried to sort of get the message out that WISE isn't just this event. It's, these programs, but more importantly, it's that movement, right? That global community, that global movement that is doing all of these things, right? And sometimes there's the imprimatur of WISE very clearly, but sometimes there's not, and that's okay too, right? It's just part of part of this wonderful ecosystem that that Her Highness sort of inspired, and we've been fortunate enough to be part of putting together.
And I think this is the unique point of WISE. There is the ecosystem within Qatar, within the region, and in the global ecosystem that's been built. And people want to work with WISE. I'm really seeing that. And not only do they want to, they already are, through the research, through the innovation, so the accelerator programs, seeing those who have proven models, where how can the network and WISE's sort of influence help them to scale up and demonstrate more impact, as well as the testbed programs. And so that's another example, which I think is brilliant, that the testbed approach started in Qatar, where we're working with schools and teachers are choosing the technology that they want to test out.
Yeah.
And then it's now something that might be expanding as a consortium for in other countries to take forward.
And those countries have been seeking us out, which is again a nice little sort of testimonial, so to speak.
And so I genuinely feel as the role is to carry the baton forward, to keep the spirit of what has brought WISE to this point, and credit to you and the team and Sheikh Moza on having the vision and executing that vision, and then the responsibility to then continue this. I think what's also interesting in education at the moment is how things have shifted, both geopolitically as well as technologically. And so for us to be at the forefront of that discussion, and the summit itself was an extension of that conversation of the previous summit of the role of technology. And I think we need to keep our eyes wide open and continue to have partners who are going to push our thinking, challenge our thinking, but actually also convert that thinking into doing, and to really consider going back full circle to how does this improve things at the classroom level. And maybe being conscious that the classroom concept might change. And this might be the first time where education does shift. And I say might. So maybe the sort of 8 to 1 school day or the 9 to 5 school day isn't what's going to be the case. Maybe the classroom can be at home, and maybe it can be in informal settings.
Or online.
Or online, exactly.
And then I think, look, I think the other thing that WISE aspires to do, and I think you'd be very well placed to sort of build on that, is also to make the connections between the different stages of education, but also linking things like the family, like health, the workplace, and workforce development. There's a sort of life is a continuum, right? It's not organized in these neat little stages of, it's early years, then it's K, then it's, primary, secondary, and so on, right? It really is a continuum. And perhaps thinking of education more as a continuum and less as these sort of discrete episodes, I think is something that WISE can play a part in putting forward. And that's to a certain extent the idea behind the WISE Index, which was launched at the summit a few weeks ago.
So I think this thinking of education as a continuum from birth, and even before birth, all the way from cradle to grave, is not done, but we are uniquely placed to do it. I think it becomes even more important now with the technological advances and the questions about what is the purpose of education, and maybe we go back to education for its own sake as well. But say a little bit more about the WISE Index.
Well, so the WISE Index was, I think, really conceived out of a twin desire, right? On the one hand, it's really to elevate this idea of education as a continuum and as an important input for human flourishing, right? Which goes beyond the sort of economic impact and making sure people come out with skills and competencies that allow them to get a job. It's sort of reviving this idea that, education is also about shaping, human beings and citizens, which I think we talked about in the last episode as well. But it's also about flagging the fact that education it's an important piece, but it's at the end of the day just a piece of a more complex socioeconomic cultural puzzle, and that you need all of the pieces to be, synergistically coming together in order to have to enable human flourishing, right? Because I have felt in the past sort of 12, 13 years of being in this job that a lot is expected of education. People tend to turn to education when they've run out of ideas of what else to do. Oh, we'll solve it with more education or better education, right? If only we could, educate and give people the skills that they need, we would solve the unemployment challenge, right? I'm skeptical about that, and I think it's education is seen as this silver bullet or easy kind of go-to excuse in order to avoid the hard thinking about what other things need to be fixed in order to overcome some of the deeper, socioeconomic challenges that we're facing. So there's these two, potentially competing ideas at play behind the index. And I'm in the fortunate position of having sort of maybe just planted the seed, and now I can just, scuttle away and watch from the comfort of my sofa how you all are going to figure this out. But I'll be there cheering you on. And I think it's important work.
A definite credit to Salma on how she's thinking about it.
And the research team.
And this bit about if I understood correctly, it's to look at the why are outcomes as they are, and perhaps having a comparison with another region or another country that might have similar inputs in terms of monetary aspect, but why is the outputs being different?
So it's looking at sort of outcomes, asking the why questions, looking at the levers, right, for influencing those outcomes, and then just being very sort of clear about which levers sit within education and the education sector and which sit outside, right? And therefore, again, if you're looking at it as a government or as a minister of education, it's almost arming you with the tools to go to your colleagues and say, hey, I need you to pull these levers in order to help me achieve ultimately the outcomes that we all want, which is to have our citizens, our population flourishing.
I think it takes, like how we started this conversation, like why am I so hard to teach? And there's a sort of formal, maybe an academic response that can come to this, but importantly, the guidance then to say, this is what can be done to make it improve. And yes,
there are other interventions, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There are factors why certain groups become not harder to teach, but maybe more are stacked against them. Yeah. And they're underserved, so how do you serve them? I want to finish off by saying I am genuinely excited at this opportunity. I think it's a huge responsibility, but it's also one that is really important and it's unique. So what advice do you have for me?
Again, I should have anticipated this question.
That's what happened in the last one.
And prepared for it. Look, I mean, I think you and I have, and I mean this very sincerely. I really consider it a privilege to have been able to spend the last 3.5, 4 months with you, working on this transition. I hope that it's I think it's gone well. And you and I have shared a lot of ideas, a lot of thoughts about how to get the best out of this wonderful initiative. I mean, my advice would really just be to kind of lean into your expertise and your experience. You're bringing a lot to the table, and again, I mean that. I mean that sincerely. You are steeped in education in a way that I wasn't. So I'd lean into that. Lean into the fact that you've got a great team supporting you and a great ecosystem that you are a part of. And then finally, lean into the WISE community. I mean, there's a lot of goodwill out there. We've got a lot of great partners that we've had the privilege of working with, and they want us to succeed, and we want them to succeed. So just lean into all of that, and I think it'll be great.
Can I say a sincere thank you for your generosity of time, your discussion, advice. I've really benefited from it. It's a brilliant platform that you've built up, and as I said, I take the responsibility seriously, and I hope when you're watching from a distance, you're like, we did good.
Yeah, no, I'll be cheering you on. Don't worry about that.
Thank you so much, Stavros.
Thank you, Asyia.